Welcome to another episode of Trending Echoes. My name is Elyazia Al Hosani, and we have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Jean-Marc Feghali, the Chief Innovation Officer at WeWalk.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on this show. It's great to be on Trends, and it's lovely to meet you, Elyazia, as well. Really looking forward to diving into our technology and talking about all the good stuff about WeWalk and everything visual impairment.
I'm actually very excited to have this conversation with you today, too. I want to start off with a very simple question. Can you walk us through on what is WeWalk?
Yeah, sure. Well, here's one we prepared earlier, which is always nice. But WeWalk is quite simple. We're a team of people with lived and professional experience of visual impairment, and we're on a very simple mission. We want to give visually impaired people the confidence and independence to travel from point A to point B safely, effectively, and independently. And the way that we're doing that is through cutting-edge technology. Now, we found that things like the standard white cane used by millions of visually impaired people worldwide are great tools. They're symbols of our independence, but they could do so much more with the right technology. In the end, this is just a simple stick. It just tells you what's here and nothing else. Whereas we know that the world is more than that. So with our first smart cane, which launched back in 2019, and this is Gen 2, we wanted to change that. We took a standard white cane, we chopped off its rubber handle, and we replaced it with the WeWalk handle. It gives visually impaired people upper body obstacle detection, so it can beep to let you know when things are in front of you or around you. You can talk to it, it's got a flashlight, it can give you nearby turn-by-turn directions, it can tell you where your next bus is coming. And what used to take minutes, or was once an impossible task for visually impaired people, like knowing when the next bus is arriving, now takes seconds with WeWalk as well. It's a technology now that's reached thousands of users worldwide. We have users in over 60 countries, including the UAE. And it's a technology that I use myself, since I myself am visually impaired as well. And it's just been a truly wonderful journey.
John, you say visually impaired, and you spotlight on it so much while explaining WeWalk. Can you please define what does visually impaired mean?
Sure. Well, Steve, visual impairment is nothing really to be shy about. A visually impaired person is just like any other person. It's just that we unfortunately see a little bit less. And what's really interesting is that visual impairment really is a spectrum. You have people that have no light perception, that have absolutely no sight at all, to sort of people like me who have a tiny little bit of sight in one eye but can still do certain tasks visually, to people that you might not think are visually impaired on first glance. And that's an interesting challenge when designing a technology like this, because we kind of have to build on that person's confidence, on what they can see, on their upbringing even sometimes, on the tools that they've used growing up, and we kind of have to build to that as well. But ultimately what we realized, severely sight impaired, partially sighted, and everything in between, in the end we're all just people that want to get along our daily lives, see friends and family and access work. We just need different tools to help us do that.
Your journey reflects on engineering and then mobility, and then you have a touch of personal experience. Can you please tell us how your personal experience shaped who you are and your research today?
That is a big question, Elyazia, but let me try to take this back to the beginning. So I actually grew up in Abu Dhabi. So I've lived in this wonderful city in the Emirates for 18 years growing up. And when I grew up, because my case of visual impairment, Leber's congenital amaurosis, LCA, you get it when you're born. It's a genetic condition. So you've always sort of grown up being visually impaired. And unfortunately, it's something which deteriorates as you grow with age. So as I was growing up in the Emirates, I always had this question of how do people get around? Like if I didn't have my parents to drive me to school, how would I get to school on my own? And that question sort of was a burning question for me for several years. And it always made me want to pursue, a science/engineering-based profession. That's exactly what I studied at school. And then I moved on to study civil engineering at Imperial College. Now, why civil engineering? Well, that's because that's exactly where transport and mobility falls into. Civil engineers, one of our key disciplines is getting people from A to B. But that's really the turning point for me, because when I started studying civil at Imperial, I very much so was their first visually impaired engineer, and they were like, "What do we do with this guy? What do we do?" I remember being on site, with crane and concrete, with a white cane in hand, and it's not a thing that you see on site usually. And that sort of made me realize, wow, like civil engineers that are visually impaired are not fundamentally involved, in making better transport systems or in making mobility technology. And that's really what then led me to pursue a PhD in the human and technological factors affecting visually impaired mobility and growing WeWalk with our founding team as well.
Did you want to be an engineer ever since you were a youngster, or was there like a turning point where you're like, okay, yes, I want to be an engineer, I want to pursue in research?
Yeah. Well, everyone wants to be an astronaut and a firefighter, so I went through those motions, but I realized, you know what, before we start improving mobility on the moon, I should probably start improving mobility on Earth first. So yeah, I think the engineering kind of came in at an early age. And I have to say, I have to thank my father, who's sitting behind the camera, but my father, my mom, and the family, because he's an engineer as well. So we kind of grew up in that mindset.
Do you feel like while growing up, the youngsters around you were aware of what is visually impaired and what is LCA? Was it like more of an inclusive community, or do you feel like you had to adapt?
Well, you see, it's not about the youngsters around me. I'd say it's almost myself. Like growing up with something like LCA, it's kind of a personal discovery journey for yourself. Like when you grow up, no one tells you, okay, here's LCA, here's exactly what you can see, and here's exactly what you'll do. Not at all. Life was filled with lots of uncertainties, and you kind of discovered that along the way. So when I was growing up, for instance, I'd say, well, why can't I catch this ball as well as anyone else? Or why am I struggling to do my maths exam, for instance, when the lights are switched off, whereas everyone else can do it? I remember one of those funny stories back in year 3, and I know my dad will remember this as well, so let's... but we had a sort of maths exam, and they'd switched off the lights because the questions were on the overhead projector, and I'd studied so hard for that test, but I just couldn't finish it. And I was like, how did these guys do it so quickly? How did they write so fast? Well, that's because I didn't know that light, the ambient light around me, affected my ability to read. And so you kind of discover, those things as you go along, and I'm still discovering till this day.
It's very inspiring how you took your uniqueness and you embedded it into your research. Today, you're also the manufacturer of the Smart Cane, and I want to ask you, what made you join WeWalk?
Sure. Well, the joining story is actually quite amazing. So I was very fortunate by complete chance to meet with WeWalk co-founder Gökhan Richley right at the beginning of the PhD. And we very much so realized that our visions were aligned. And so as a founding team, at the time we grew WeWalk from a team of, what was only 4 or 5 people to a company now of almost 30. And the most important thing is, as you touched on, that personal experience isn't just driven by individuals. I'm not the only visually impaired person in the organization. We have lots of visually impaired people, like our CPO, Gershat, our user lead, Gamze. We almost have a breadth of these lived experiences. And as a founding team, we've very much so tried to include not just our own lived experiences, but of our thousands of users in everything that we do with the product. It's so important. We very much so believe in the saying, nothing about us without us.
The Smart Cane, many users say it is more than just a product and makes lives easier. And it is a very much globally recognized product. The Time magazine, Amazon, Microsoft. Can you please tell me, how did your insights from your PhD redirect the direction of WeWalk?
Sure. I think one of the biggest findings from the PhD is that everything has to be based on a systems engineering perspective. Before you even put, pen to paper and start designing a product like this, you have to start from the user requirements. What does a user actually want to do with the product? Do they want to catch a bus? Do they want to detect the height of the pavement? Do they want to understand if it's light or dark outside? And that whole process of systems engineering was taken from the PhD and the work at Imperial and embedded in every single thing we do at WeWalk. I think a great example of that is our little obstacle detection sensor over here. This looks like a very simple thing, right? The obstacle detection, and I can sort of demo this. I'll put it into short. Sort of picks up my hand over here, but it doesn't pick it up when it's over here. And it doesn't pick it up when it's over here. Now, why does it do that? Well, we spent over 50 different versions of this little sensor here, this little horn which directs the signal, to understand exactly how a person moves with their Smart Cane, so that it doesn't over beep and stop them and tell them there's obstacles everywhere, but at the same time isn't so unsensitive that it just doesn't beep at all and they end up walking into a tree. So we spent thousands of hours with our users understanding not just where the obstacle beam should come from, but the distances for the obstacles and how it will get a bit faster as you get closer, slower as you go away. And we tuned that all through these, continuous innovations. So that systematic approach from the PhD and through working with a wonderful product team led us to building, a piece of tech that's dependable and reliable for our community.
How did you come up with the idea of creating a smart cane that is that smart and being so inclusive with the visually impaired community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, we kind of had to take it back to basics. If you look at other technologies out there for our community, people really want to jump the gun and just use the most cutting edge stuff there is. And sometimes you forget about these basics. Like people build wearable devices, people almost get rid of the cane. But what we found is that, we've relied on this technology for centuries, things like the standard shaft. We can't just get rid of this thing which does what it does really, really well, right? And so for us, we had to take a very careful approach. And what we also learned from, again, working with our users, is that it's not just the end users that use this, but it's the teachers, the orientation and mobility trainers, the rehabilitation specialists that spend this time with visually impaired people, training them how to use these types of products. So if we came in as a company to people like Guide Dogs UK or the Royal National Institute of Blind People and said, you know what, we don't want the cane, we're going to just get rid of it and do something radical, it would never work. It genuinely wouldn't. So for us, we kind of had to really be very careful. We had to build our technology to not take away from the standard cane, just folds just like a standard cane. But at the same time, give the user the extra confidence they need, like the obstacle detection and navigation when they need it.
I think what's the most inspiring thing about the smart cane is that you took something so simple and you embedded technology in it, making it the balance of technology and inclusivity. More than a product, like everyone says it is. Can you tell me a story of one of the users that came up to you as, wow, this is actually life-changing, not just to me, but to someone else too?
Of course. The nicest thing is working with our users. We spend a lot of time traveling to events, things like Sight Village in the UK, to Sight City in Frankfurt, all the way to even Sight World in Japan. We were in Japan a couple months ago. So we get to see and speak to a lot of our end users. And we genuinely get so much excitement of people just saying, wow, this is going to be life-changing. It doesn't look like my normal cane. We have lovely stories. If I think of Regina, for instance, one of our earliest smart cane adopters in the US, she has a smart cane 1. She's an older woman, so technology is always an interesting development for that population. But she used it and she just says, this has really given me the independence to walk on my own, as the exact quote. I think another one of our lovely users is Stephen Scott. He's actually a UK podcaster in Double Tap TV. He's completely blind and he reviews technology for a living. So you can imagine the amount of tech that he gets on a day-to-day basis. And he says a lot of them end up on the shelf. And WeWalk is actually the one that I use personally, day to day. And it was just great. Not only does he talk about it on his podcast, we also did an event at the Royal National Institute of Blind People with him as a panelist where he, at one point, this is really funny, people asked me, Jean-Marc, tell us about the smart cane. He said, no, Jean-Marc, I'll take it from here. He went and just did the demo himself because he just uses it. And I think that's just, that genuine everyday use case is really what drives us.
Conversations. I know that you had a conversation with the Prime Minister at the UK Parliament. Can you tell me more about the conversation you had?
Of course. So just like the UAE, the UK is very forward-thinking when it comes to AI and technology, especially in terms of best practices like WeWalk. And so as part of London Tech Week, we weren't just invited to do a panel session at the London Tech Week event, but actually to be one of 10 organizations, 10 at number 10, I guess, to be featured at number 10 and to speak with the Prime Minister and to show him our technology. And again, there was just a huge amount of excitement. I mean, not just through our discussion with Sir Keir Starmer himself, but rather with UK government. We've got a lot of great people like Marshall de Cordova, the MP for Battersea, who's a great WeWalk supporter, and Innovate UK, the government funding that has provided us lots of government funding to bring the technology to where it is today. So I think excitement is the word that I would use and just really pushing this to go forward. On top of meeting Sir Keir Starmer, we also had the privilege of winning the King's Award for Innovation. So we had the chance to meet with His Majesty King Charles as well in Windsor, where he had a chance to play around with WeWalk and to see really how far the innovation has come.
I want to know more about your journey and how Imperial College supported you as a person, as your research. So I want to talk more about that stage of your life.
Yeah. I'm gonna do more name dropping here, but not just Imperial. There's actually a very special person at Imperial, Professor Washington Ochang, the head of Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Him and Imperial and the rest of the PhD team have been genuinely wonderful. And they didn't just support me throughout my PhD, but they're actually official project partners at WeWalk. You know, we had almost, I think at one point, 20 PhD students somehow involved in the development of our product, whether it's building our sensing algorithms to our navigation algorithms. And they're still project partners today on how we can improve the sensing technology. So not only are they involved in the R&D aspects through our Innovate UK funded projects, but also in terms of teaching. So now we also have master's students and PhD students that are studying visual impairment at Imperial because of the WeWalk project.
I want to ask you a question on your research.
Sure.
How do you keep your research very much inclusive, but also scalable today?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's the age-old question. How do you move from academia to industry? I think the biggest piece of advice I have for people is to keep an open mind. I think no first-gen product or no product at all, including this, is ever going to be perfect. And there's always ways for us to improve. So there's two key things here.
Okay.
The first one is that always learning perspective. With our Smart Cane 2, because we have our own in-house software and hardware development team, which is something we invested in as a company. You know, not many startups do hardware. It's hard. It's in the name, right? We decided, nope, we want to make sure we get a good product here. Let's invest in our own development team and work agilely to keep developing the product if people find issues with it. I think that's the most important thing one could do. In academia, you don't really learn that. In academia, you sort of have to have the best result, publish a paper, and that's it. Whereas in industry, it's a bit more tough. You're going to realize that, hey, people have higher and higher expectations for the product. The next part really is scalability. And I think for us, again, realizing that we cannot do this journey alone. We don't just sell WeWalk ourselves, but we have distribution partners. Here in Abu Dhabi, we have Topland, for instance. In the UK, we have Sight and Sound Technology. Putting trust in those partners and letting them take your product and then distribute it for you is the biggest learning. And again, in academia, you don't really do that. You don't really talk about distributing a product. But in industry, you begin to realize you have to trust the people that are on the ground that'll do it for you. And then finally, I think investment is one of the biggest things we've learned. You know, when first coming out with a technology like this, for a market that not many investors understand, it can be a bit of a challenge to say, well, if you invest in this, you're going to change the lives of millions of people. And as we refined our pitch and our value proposition, we were able to get investment from people like Nesta Impact Investments, Meridian Health Ventures, and lots of other great investors like Tim Draper, for instance, who invested in Tesla, to join us as well. And I think that combination of things, A, realizing you don't have a perfect product and you should always keep innovating, including investing in your own development teams. B, letting people do the commercial work for you, not trying to do everything yourself, but letting your distributors on the ground, letting them do it for you. Great. And then C, finding the right investors who can really back the company and give you not just money, but also their insights and their wider connections. I think those three aligned for us, and that's how we were able to come to where we are today.
All inspiring stories like yours come with challenges too. And I know, and because I researched you before this episode, music is your escape.
Yeah.
So I want to know more about what is one challenge that you faced throughout this successful journey, I would say, and what was your escape?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think the challenge, well, fundamentally medical with LCA is, as I said, it's something that kind of, you know, deteriorates over time. So you kind of find yourself having to adapt on a day-to-day basis. And I remember, you know, all the way back in, I say all the way back, it's only 3 years ago in 2023, just as I was submitting the PhD, I unfortunately lost all sight in one eye. So just in a period of 5 days, I went completely blind in a single eye. And that was a nice present after finishing a PhD, but anyway. It sort of made me realize that, you know, no matter how certain things are, like ending a PhD, things are always going to be changing, especially with something like LCA. But for me, whilst it was a bit of a difficult period, and I was like, I wish I did things differently, it almost gave me a new perspective on more and more of the challenges that our users end up facing with a product like this. In fact, if anything, I ended up using my WeWalk, you know, more and more. And I think, yeah, it was certainly a difficult period, but it's one that I feel like thanks to the lovely team we have around and thanks to just how mission-driven our technology is, we were kind of able to overcome that and to be even fiercer in the work that we're doing. And in terms of an escape, well, on top of genuinely working with one of the loveliest team in the world, it never feels like work. It always feels like you're doing something enjoyable. I do love my music. I love sort of just sometimes sitting down, putting on a good pair of headphones, not just listening, but also creating. So producing with my guitar or with my piano, or using my little music production software, and kind of using that as an escape. And I find that sometimes the lyrics and the melodies that I write are all kind of related to how I'm feeling. And so if I look back to that time in 2023, when I sort of had that loss of sight, not only did it affect my work life, of course, but it also affected the type of music I was writing. It was almost more hopeful in a weird way, but yeah, it really was an escape for me.
They always say music is the light in the end of the tunnel. And
Yeah.
I truly believe in that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what was inspiring even now when speaking about your challenges is that even you took that challenge that you faced and you turned it into a point where you're like, okay, now I have the smart cane. But because LCA, people can also suddenly lose their sight. So we can add something to the cane that would help them if that happens.
Yeah.
In the next decade, what do you think are the new technologies that would come up that would actually develop your smart cane today?
Again, very, very good questions. I think AI, of course, that big word that everyone's talking about, really is a great step forward. But I think I want to kind of talk about careful AI, if that makes sense. Empathetic AI, even. We kind of have to be careful that whilst AI is coming out, things like GPT have really empowered people to do things they've never done before, write essays in the space of minutes. For visually impaired people, we almost create more and more of a divide, especially if these apps are not accessible. So for us at the company, we want to, of course, use AI, and we do use AI in things like our voice assistant. But we do it carefully to understand what the user actually wants to do with it. And we ensure that we put them on the same level as other people that use things like GPT. And one of the key AI developments is computer vision. I think computer vision today, especially with things like Google's Gemma, for instance, are really powerful. You can hold up your phone and it'll tell you exactly what's in front of you. But again, if that app is fundamentally inaccessible, suddenly a visually impaired person can't use it. So we're working with organizations like Imperial and the Royal National Institute of Blind People to take these computer vision models and to try to develop them into our technology as well. So I think computer vision is going to be very powerful moving forward, but we just have to do it in a way that's careful so that we don't further divide or create a digital divide, if you like, between people that can use AI and people that are essentially blocked out of it because the apps aren't accessible enough.
Why do you think it's important for universities, schools, and companies to be very much supportive and inclusive when coming up with technologies and developments that might or should have social impact?
Yeah, I think it's because disabled people are such a fundamental and large group of our population. They say 1 in 6 people are disabled, so that's 1 billion people worldwide, if not more, living with some sort of disability. For visually impaired people, that's 253 million people with a moderate to severe sight impairment in the world. We're not a small group, and I don't like talking about things, I guess, financially, but there's something called the purple pound, for instance, in the UK, where there's a measurable loss to businesses for not actually involving disabled people or letting them access their services. So we're not a small population, we're a huge population. And if companies can sort of give us that access, then not only will they have happier customers and be a better company, but hopefully they'll see more financial return as well. And hey, I have to say, sometimes visually impaired people, we come up with the best ideas. If you can make something easy to see and easy to use for someone that's visually impaired, chances are you've made it a better product for older people or for anyone that might struggle with technology or for people who don't understand the language. I'll give you a real example from WeWalk. We have a service on top of WeWalk called WeAssist, where if your smart cane can't help you in a certain area, like in a train station where there's no GPS, you can click a button in your app and you can get connected to a trained agent who will then guide you through your smartphone camera. We built it for visually impaired people, and we trialed it at Transport for London's underground stations, which went really well. But then we realized, hey, wait a minute. What if you're a tourist and you can't actually understand which line you have to go to? What if you don't understand the language? Or what if you're just anyone in a really complicated train station? surely you can use our system to also navigate. And that was a huge value proposition for us. So yeah, if you can make it work for a visually impaired person, you've probably made a better service for everyone else.
What are your plans for the next 5 years?
This is top secret. That's a great question. Plan number one, I think, is to keep scaling up our smart cane. Again, we love this technology. We're fully committed to it as an organization, and we want to keep working with more great partners like Guide Dogs UK and other organizations worldwide. That's number one. Number two, capitalize on AI, but again, do it in that empathetic, careful way. So let's bring computer vision to visually impaired people, but let's not overwhelm them with it. Let's make sure it's an accessible experience that puts them on the same level as everyone else. Number three, make more music. I think that's always a fun thing to do. And I think number four, it's really spend more time with family. Whilst technology like WeWalk and academia is all great, especially during that little story I mentioned in 2023, the people that most supported me at the time was my wonderful family, my parents, my wife, my younger brothers, and just sort of everyone in the team. And I think that human connection, no matter how good technology and AI gets, nothing's ever going to replace that. And I really want to spend more time doing that in the next year.
Last year was the year of the community in the UAE. And one of the main objectives was inclusivity and awareness.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that is very important for different communities around the world to be inclusive and open-minded, like you said? And developed?
Yeah. I think there's a very interesting thing called the social model of disability, where people aren't disabled by their fundamental medical conditions, but rather disabled by the barriers around them. It's like someone in a wheelchair isn't necessarily disabled if they have, a flat plane to walk on. But as soon as a step comes up, because that was put in by society, that then accentuates their disability. And I think that idea of the UAE being inclusive, which you really are, I've seen personally the massive strides that you've made. Every single day in the UAE and in the UK and globally, I'm feeling that I'm less and less disabled. And I feel that for other communities is just as important. If as a country, we take away these societal barriers, these social barriers, there won't have to be disability at all. We'll have sort of people that can work, live and play just like anyone else. And again, I have to say this, a credit to the UAE, especially with the introduction of the persons of determination, the financial benefits that are offered to that as well by different telecom operators or service providers. That makes a huge difference, and people really, really do notice that, not just in the UAE, but internationally. I can't wait to go back to the UK, for instance, and to tell all my colleagues and friends, I had such a great time in the UAE because of all the new developments that have come to us.
My last question would be, what is one advice you'd give the youth today that are trying to balance between inclusivity and innovation?
Yeah. This is kind of advice that I would think, what would I have said to myself many, many years ago? I think as hard as it can be in the moment, we're all human in the end, as hard as that loss of sight might be, or any other disability one might have, or any other challenge, it doesn't have to be disability one might have. That's always going to be a point source in your life, and you're always going to find a way to move past that. And eventually that little point is going to turn into a bit of an envelope of good things. And for me, for instance, whether that little point of not being able to do the maths exam or losing sight in one eye, that has then turned into a very positive envelope, if you'd like, of building great technology, working with wonderful people, meeting with people that I would have never met before had it not been for that individual point. So I think, my advice is, it might seem tough now, it might seem uncertain now, it might seem bad now, but it's always going to be up from there, and if you make the most of it. So I think that's the advice I would have given myself back then. Not sure if it's good advice, but I'd hope that someone gets some benefit from it.
That's great advice, actually. Thank you, Dr. Jean-Marc Feghali, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. This was really a wonderful discussion, and it's such a pleasure to be able to mix in, obviously, the academic and technological stuff with real personal experience. So grateful for the opportunity to have done this.
We're grateful to have you. Thank you so much.